Welcome to Coercion and Undue Influence, a presentation by Solutions IRB. My name is Cassidy Nosecable, and I'm pretty new to the IRB world, so we'll be learning this together. It can be tricky to learn anything if you don't actually know what they mean, so let's talk about what coercion and undue influence mean in the IRB world. Coercion is when an overt threat of harm is intentionally presented by one person to another in order to obtain compliance. And don't worry, we'll be going over examples of these in just a moment. Undue influence is an offer of excessive, unwarranted, inappropriate, or improper reward or other overture to obtain compliance. So really, if you look at these two, they're kind of the opposite of each other. Coercion is the negative. That's when you are threatening somebody to get something done. Whereas undue influence can be the opposite. You can be overly rewarding somebody to get something done, almost bribing them. Let's go over some examples of coercion. One example would be telling participants that they will lose their healthcare coverage if they don't participate in the study. Obviously, that is a threat, so they're going to want to participate if they want to keep their health coverage. That's a big no-no in the IRB world. Another example would be threatening students with a failing grade if they don't join the study. So if you're a professor holding a research study, you want your participants to join, and you threaten them with a failing grade, that's coercion. Again, big red flag for the IRB world. Withholding medical treatment from patients if they don't join a study, again, that's a threat that's causing overt harm, that's coercion. And threatening to offer less than the agreed upon compensation for a study unless the participant completes a new portion of the research. So if you were going to offer them $100 to complete one task, and once it's done, you actually decided you wanted to add a second task, and you tell them they won't get paid the $100 unless they complete the second one too, that's coercion. Now, there can be a lot of gray area with this, so really what it comes down to is protecting those participants. You don't want to do anything that would cause them to feel threatened in order to participate in the study. Remember, undue influence is kind of the opposite of coercion. Instead of a threat, it's an excessive reward. So some examples of undue influence are excessive compensations amount. Now, again, both coercion and undue influence can come with a lot of gray area, and when it comes to excessive compensation, there's not a set number for that. You know, the compensation for an anonymous survey might be different than the compensation for a lab study where the participants have to drive to your lab and stay for a week. You might be compensating those people a lot more than the anonymous survey. So there's not a set number, but really what it comes down to is when compensation is so high that it outweighs any potential risks for the participants. Now, this is especially true for vulnerable populations. Let's say you're doing research with participants who are low income. You have to be really careful with the amount of compensation you offer, because if you're low income and someone's offering you $600 to do something, you might need that $600. You might not be worried about the risks, and that is undue influence. We want our participants to be participating in the study because they choose to, not because the compensation alone. Now, another example of undue influence would be doctors offering VIP treatment for patients who enroll in their research. So let's say I do decide to enroll in my doctor's research because my doctor promised me my own private room at the hospital. That's VIP treatment. That's special treatment from the doctor that I otherwise wouldn't get unless I was enrolling in their research. Again, undue influence there. Another example would be kind of the opposite of the one we saw in coercion. Instead of failing your students, you're offering them extra credit to participate in the research. But that's the only way they can get extra credit. There's no other ways to get extra credit. They have to get it by joining your research. That is undue influence. And there's, again, a lot of gray area when it comes to this. So it might not even be an overt offer of something. It might just be that as a patient, you feel obligated to participate in research if your doctor is the one recruiting you, is the one asking you to join, you might feel like you have to. They're not saying you have to, they're not threatening you in any way, they aren't even offering anything extra, but it's my doctor and he's asking me to do something, I guess I'll do it. That's undue influence. Same thing in a school setting, teachers giving and collecting surveys. I don't know if you guys were like me, but if my teacher asked me to do anything, I was the goody two-shoes in the class. I wanted to make my teacher happy, so I would do anything. That can be undue influence because if that teacher is just giving a survey that's optional, those kids or students are going to want to please that teacher. Now, we often see coercion and undue influence show up in two specific areas within the study application. The first is the recruitment phase of research. And this is really common because something as simple as having the compensation bolded on your flyer is undue influence. So it's really easy to kind of slip into these gray areas of undue influence and coercion when you're recruiting people. Another one that we see every once in a while is prematurely claiming to have a cure to recruit people. So say you're doing research on a specific disease and you say, if you participate in this, we will cure your problem. You don't know that. That's why you're doing research. That is undue influence. You're offering a reward that's definitely going to outweigh the risks for the participants, even though that reward might not actually exist. And again, if a teacher is trying to recruit their students and they tell them they have to participate or they're going to fail the class, that's coercion. And of course they're going to participate. So again, that's where we see this pop up often in the recruitment phase. Occasionally, we also see it in the consent documents and in the withdrawal process as well. So a good way to try and avoid that is to include a statement within the consent documentation saying specifically that by participating or not participating in this, it's not going to affect their relationship. Let's say it's a doctor to a patient. So if my doctor is handing me this consent thing to be in their study or to try and recruit me into their study, it should say on there somewhere that participating or not participating is not going to affect our relationship at all. If it's a teacher-student, it could say it's not going to affect their class standing or anything like that. So just making sure that you are making it clear that whether you participate or don't participate, it's not going to change anything else about your time with us. That's a good way to kind of avoid this undue influence and coercion when you're trying to recruit or consent people. One other thing to note, if you are conducting a study on children, you still should have a statement like that, but remember to include it in language that they'll understand. You want your language to match your audience and match your participants, so keep that in mind as you're kind of drafting your recruitment materials and your consent documentation. The biggest thing you can do to uphold the ethical standards when it comes to coercion and undue influence is just to be really vigilant. Make sure you know how to manage any potential problems that might come up in your study when it comes to coercion or undue influence. So if you know that there are benefits from your study, make sure that those are stated accurately but not exaggerated. Again, we don't want to go into that undue influence area of promising more than we can actually offer. If you have any uncertain benefits or potential benefits, you can state them as that, but you can't promise anything extra. If you think you might have a cure, you can say this could potentially be a cure, but you cannot say this is a cure. Make sure that you're just being honest and straightforward with your participants about the benefits that they will definitely be having and the benefits that they could potentially be having. You also want to make sure that you are limiting the levels of financial or non-financial incentives that you're offering. You know how your study is going to work, you know your audience, so it's really in your field to make sure that you have a fair limit on that. You want to make sure you're compensating them fairly, but you also want to make sure you are not overcompensating them. And ensure that the incentives and how they will be provided are clearly described to the participants. They want to know exactly what kind of gift card they're getting and when they're getting it. Make sure that's clear. And really, just when it comes down to it, look out for your participants. Put yourself in their shoes. You want to make sure that they are joining your study because they want to, not because they feel like they have to or because they think they're going to get something extra special out of it. And when it comes down to it, if you aren't sure if what you have is undue influence or coercion, just ask. That's what we're here for. There can be a lot of gray area when it comes to this, and it really varies case by case. So when in doubt, reach out to us for a consultation. We're always here and willing to talk. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you did end up wanting to have a consultation with us, feel free to reach out to us at correspondence@solutionsirb.com or visit our website for more information at solutionsirb.com. Thanks again.